Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be looking at the weekly metagame breakdown for the historic best of three format. Last week we had or it might have been 2 weeks ago. Time is all a blur at this point. But recently we had the qualifier weekend that was historic, as well as the metagame challenge. The only list that I saw that got to the qualifier for Arena that came across my timeline was an Orzhov Vampires list. Not exactly the one I was kind of sharing, but the general concept was the same. So we kind of guessed right on the archetype. Even the player mentioned they played 5 mirrors in day 2. So that is something that's a good meta call. And we'll see the Vampires list be prevalent throughout. But we're going to take a look, seeing with the ladder reset. The first week usually has a little bit of noise. Everybody comes down from Mythic. There's a lot more kind of congregation at that Platinum rank, as folks then start becoming the outliers, pushing to early Mythic as well. But we're going to get the data from Untapped GG, what you see on the screen, companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client. If you want to use Untapped to track your games, the link is in the video description. Otherwise, I will paste and timestamp all these deck lists into the video description so you can copy paste however you'd like. So we're going to start off looking at the popularity today in terms of what the metagame distribution is like at the Platinum Mythic ranks, and then we'll jump into the decks themselves. I will preface, it is a smaller sample size at the beginning of the month, so some of the win rates are a little bit inflated. What we really just want to focus on is the archetypes themselves, what is viable in terms of winning as we kind of accumulate the month's stats again. We usually see this a little bit more in the Eternal formats, especially best of 3. So jumping to popularity today, Boros Auras is the most played deck at about 19%. The main difference with a lot of these lists, some are on Hushbringer main, some are on Amped Raptor main. So it's kind of a meta call how you want to approach that. I qualified for top, I was playing best of 1, but finished the top 1200, I finished like 900 and change. What Vampires was most of the climb, and then the securing the top was with Auras and Best of 1. In Best of 1, the Hushbringer was very good because there's a lot of just random things with ETBs, the energy decks, the combo decks that you could kind of mess up that way there. Vampires at 17%, Devotion at 13%, Mardu Sac at just a shade under 10. We have the energy deck at 4.5, Dimir Affinity at 2.7. Dimir's got the highest like play rate, but based on like kind of the aggregate stats, it's got the lowest of the 3 between Azorius, Mono Blue, and Dimir in terms of affinity. And then we have Izzet Wizards at about 2.5%. So looking at the stats, again, just kind of opening it up so we can see what's happening. We have 7,300 games played. The highest win rate deck is actually Izzet Wizards. Again, a little bit inflated stats in terms of win rates, 15 matches. Not a huge sample, but kind of gives us like a sense of the archetype. So this is the Chorus Wizards. You get Ribald Shanty and Hymn to Ages. They're scalable spells. After you cast one, they like supercharge the others. So Ribald Shanty starts dealing 2 damage, then 3, then 4, then 5. Hymn to the Ages, same idea, draws you 1, draws you 2, kind of scales as the game goes. Dreadhorde Arcanist and Snapcaster both let you recast these effects to get extra value. This version's not on Slickshot, opting to go with Balmor and Snapcaster Mage instead. Sleight of Hand as the kind of card advantage. More of a curating effect, so giving you card quality just over sheer card draw. Your trade-off is this is a sorcery, so you don't get to be as tricky in combat, if that would make sense. You can't like attack with your prowess creatures and then do a pump, for example. But oftentimes you're pumping before because you usually want to pump your Dreadhorde Arcanist to flash back the higher cost spells. Arena of Glory plays really nice with Dreadhorde, another way to give it haste. Same with Balmor as a way to give it haste the turn it comes in. Jingantha Companion, you have Pyroclasm for like the energy decks, the go wide, the low to the ground decks, Surgical for combo and graveyard hate, Spell Pierce is cheap disruption, Soul Guide Lantern for kind of all the graveyard, as opposed to Surgical that's more targeted. Needle is really good against Sorin, Woodlands, anything that's like activated abilities you want to target. Meltdown for affinity, and then Lithomantic Barrage. Good against auras, you can hit through Sheltered by Ghosts. It gets around the counter condition, stuff like that. Other cards you may want to consider, Stone of Erich, very good against like the Ajani piles, stuff like that. Just kind of giving you that protection from them flipping Ajani. A flipped Ajani is usually game over in most cases. So Orzhov Vampires. So this is pretty close to the list that qualified. There's some sideboard changes that I see, but the notable thing, they're just on the straight Sorin Alenda, no Vein Ripper, no other vampire in it. Bigger increase in terms of the creature MDFC lands, full sky or 3 Skyclave apparitions. These numbers were varying. My early list had them, later lists didn't. Going with dedicated Dollmaker over Felia, the immediate blink versus the kind of sustained blink. Emperor of Bones gives you another way to kind of cast or utilize these effects. No Ketramos as a notable. We were playing a number of Ketramos decks. 3 Peddlers. They made a meta call with Noxious Grasp. Good against Auras, good against Sum of Energy, good against obviously the Mirror with Alenda. Reasonable against Mono Green as well. So that was a meta call. Vanishing Verse, Catch-All, Thoughtseize, Inquisition. So heavier on discard, Fragment Reality in here. Notably, no Fatal Push. So that was a call there. Makes you a little bit softer to the aggressive decks. So that's a notable kind of call there. Only 1 Verge in the mana base, 1 Silent Clearing, 1 Pathway. Again, some considerations with the mana base. Unsure why they went that route. Caves in here as just another kind of dual land. They have the Mutavaults in their version. So the Portent in the other version was the Stalwart, the Alchemy card, the 3-drop that taxes your opponent's next non-creature. It's another card that if you blink can kind of add progressive taxes onto your opponent's effects, reasonable against like Lotus, the non-creature spell decks. The End was a catch-all removal that they mentioned they just threw in. Good against like stripping like all copies, if you think like Flage or something like that they're lower in the volume. Elish Norn is ETB hate, good against Mono Green. The one thing I don't necessarily love with Elish, I found these games, you weren't usually getting beyond like 3 to 4 lands. You're usually kind of just pushing through unless the game goes really long. Against Mono Green, you're not accelerating fast enough for this to be relevant. I would say like they're usually comboing off before. That is my perspective, but they have it in the sideboard. Sweeper package, Divine Purge, Wrath of Skies, flexible removal options. The Purge lets you reset your ETB effects. Wrath of Skies also kind of useful because it can hit like bombardment, stuff like that, but it does kind of counteract. Both of these sweepers do hit your Stone of Erich, which limits some of its effectiveness when you have like the Ajani piles and stuff like that. Another Noxious Grasp and Surgical Extraction. There's a lot of ways to build vampires. The core of the deck, I would say the Emperor of Bones, at least in some numbers, was really good. I like the discard main. I do like having some Fatal Push in the main. The Witch Enchanter, Juggernaut Peddler works really nice. Dedicated Dollmaker versus Phalia have reasonable approaches for both. Another card that I was playing in my sideboard was Blood Baron of Escopa for the Mirrors. It has protection against basically everything in the Mirrors. And it's a vampire, so you can scale it up. It lets you still keep a creature out against Alenda. 5 mana is more than castable. Vein Ripper, we hard cast a number of times. I went 6-1 in the metagame challenge with my list. I'm like 19-5 with versions of it, but that's kind of my thoughts there. I really like this deck. It's fun. Boros Energy, 87%. So a little bit bigger version. We have Jengantha, not Luris. As such, we have Amp Raptor, we have Aether Hub. There is a higher likelihood with this version that if you don't hit the Aether Hub, you are going to exile something that you cannot cast. A little bit more resilient of a version. However, you're not kind of all in on like smaller dorks, get hit by a sweeper, concede. Esper Sentinel for some card advantage. You have a lot of flexible removal. Thraben Charm can be removal, enchantment hate, or graveyard hate. Full bombardment set, Ajani's kind of mixed in, Fable, Flage, and then Tajik is a very sticky threat. Now, notably, there are a number of cards that are exile-based, Fragment Reality, stuff of that nature, so one little thing to kind of consider there, but an army in a can, basically. Fragment, just flexible removal, hits a bunch of different targets, Pithing Needle, Portable Holes, cheap removal that gets around things like the Soul Cleanser that you normally would kill your energy that you can't remove it. Stone for kind of the sack effect mirrors, Dampening Spear for anything that's Mono green, Lotus, stuff like that. Thraben Charm, just flexible removal, and then Tajik for the grindier matchups. So we have, they're calling it Esper, but it's basically Dimir Vampires. So this is the Psychic Frog kind of variant. So similar ideas, a lot more sweepers in this version. You have your Baelmerk, a little bit more controlling. Stubborn Denial is a way that with these bigger creatures, you can just have an encounter or a counter any non-creature. The one Tameo in here is for Fragment. Kind of in the Vampires list as well. I ended up switching to play one Necrogoyf, just as having a 1-drop in the deck was useful to kind of cascade into from Fragment, because you usually have more 2-drops. They want to target your frog and stuff like that, so at least you get some immediate value if they hit you. But very similar idea. Baelmerk helps fill Treasure Cruise, as well as gives you fodder to Psychic Frog, so nice little kind of synergy with the deck there. Spell Snare, Cheap Disruption for like Lurrus piles, Stone for sack decks, more Stubborn Denial for like the more control-y decks, non-creature decks, Surgical for combo hate, Dampening Sphere for mono green, or for Lotus, Disrupt their Flute just as a tax effect, kind of Pithing Needle at instant speed, Emperor of Bones in the grindier matchups, the Baelmerk mirrors, anything like that. I had a game where I was playing against Woodlands and I was stealing their Ulamog, so all my wins came from stealing their Ulamogs and annihilating them with it, which was fun. So we have Boros Auras. This one is 85%. So this version is opting for Amped Raptor in the main. So this lets you get some free value in terms of cast. Again, Hushbringer could be played in this spot. I've seen some lists that are playing a hybrid of both of them. But this deck here, the kind of strong lines are you plot Demonic Ruckus on 1, turn 2, Light Pause, cast Demonic Ruckus, get Sheltered by Ghost, get some built-in protection, remove something, and then kind of scale from there. You have protection effects from Giver of Ruins, as well as Esper Sentinel. Notably, when you're giving protection with Giver of Ruins against white, if you have auras, you will drop off your auras. Same with doing protection from red. So keep that in mind. Also, something that I keep having people run into and not realizing, Giver of Ruins can give you protection from colorless, so against lands, against various things like that. That's come up a number of times, at least in the best of 1 ladder. But then you just have your toolbox, flying, haste, vigilance, you have protection effects that Light Pause kind of helps you go along. Tormod's Crypt for cheap graveyard hate, Lauren's Escape for protection, Needle for activated abilities, Portable Holes very strong like the Mirror, Lurrus Piles. High Noon's an interesting inclusion because it does kind of slow down how much you can explode on your turns with something like Core Spirit Dancer. But against the decks that are chaining multiple spells per turn, mono green, Lotus, stuff like that, it does play a good job there. Against like Jetstorm, some of the more fringier decks, it works that way. Hushbringer for ETB decks. Mono green Devotion up next. This one's at 84%. So this deck wants to generate lots of mana. So you have Nykthos here. Tap on tap with Kiora, generates a huge bunch of mana. Trailblazer and Kiora both draw cards when you have bigger creatures come into play. You have access to a Karn board, which we'll take a look in a sec. That's how you win the game most games. You just generate a whole bunch of mana, Karn for a silver bullet, and then win that way there. Elish Norn is the Selesnya element of the deck. That gives you double ETB. You could generate white from the Temple Gardens or the Utopia Sprawls or Delighted Halfling or Birds, or just storm the festival into it, doubling up things like Cavalier of Thorns. You also have Hollow Henge Wrangler. So when it enters the battlefield, you seek a land card, and then you can discard a land to conjure Hollow Henge Beast into your hand, and then you can activate this ability from your graveyard. This helps you if you're kind of flooding. You can just kind of pitch cards. Even if you mill it over with Cavalier, you still get that ability. Your sideboard, Graveyard Hate, Artifact Enchantment Hate, activated abilities, cheap removal, sacrifice, activated abilities, blow up their lands with Karn. Pestilence Cauldron gets fetched, but you cast Restorative Burst. That lets you recycle stuff from your graveyard. You generate enough mana, you can basically loop Kioras and Karns and gain infinite life. One Ring for card advantage, Phyrexian Metamorph as a copy effect. Sky Sovereign as kind of recurable removal. Remember, with Karn, you can turn the Sky Sovereign into a creature with its plus in attack without having to crew as well. God Pharaoh's Gift against the kind of both control decks and decks that are operating on fewer mana. It's a way to kind of tax them out of the game. Mindslaver takes over their turns. This goes into exile, but Karn does have the text that you can fetch a card from exile, so you can keep rebuying Mindslaver for multiple turns. Chroma's Memorial, if you're able to generate enough mana, just lets you win that turn by letting all your creatures attack with haste, a flying vigilance, trample. And then you have kind of your big top end. Cityscape Lover blows up an individual thing. Portal Phyrexia is Mass Edict, really good against auras, stuff like that. Mardu Sac. So this deck here, 81%. So this is got elements of the energy deck, but more of aristocrat style. Goblin Bombardment and Johnny Amp Raptor package. You have your Blood Artist effect in Marionette Apprentice. Card advantage through Corrupted Conviction. Village Rites lets you draw cards along with Trap Finder and Unlucky Witness that when they die provide you card advantage. The energy from like Guide of Souls gains you life, makes your creatures bigger. Cthulhian Nightmare also lets you recycle creatures, and then you have Fragment and Prismatic Ending, cheap removal. Lurrus Pile, Fatal Push, more removal. Activate, or anything with like activate abilities. You're going to name Sorin preemptively, Woodlands, Kiora, Karn, stuff like that. Stone of Erich for the sack mirrors, Thoughtseize for hand hate along with Juggernaut Peddlers, Raven Charm, flexible kind of removal like we mentioned, and then Brotherhood's End can be reasonable in like the smaller mirrors. Like you don't necessarily care if all your stuff dies at times since you can buy some of it back, but more than anything it's the artifact mode blowing up a lot of affinities state to blow up their affinity, also blows up their lands, which is kind of cool. We then have Azorius Affinity, 74%. So this deck here is looking to put a bunch of cheap artifacts into play, Mox Amber, Ornithopter, just build up your affinity count, Portable Hole from the white components of the deck, Ghost Vacuum, more cheap Graveyard Hate, Shadow Sphere for lifelink Trample. Sometimes you'll see Lava Spur Boots that give the haste to the Kappa Cannoneer. Cameo in here is both a legend for Mox Amber as well as when it attacks creates artifacts. You get that, increases your affinity and then kind of lets you loop. You have Emery here, Metallic Rebuke as cheap counters. Emery starts looping stuff. Thought Monitor should be a 4 of. This one's on Memory Guardian. So there's a couple interesting choices with this. Again, you can kind of flex it. I don't like playing 4 Kappa Cannoneers. I usually play 3. They don't scale as well in multiples. You always want to see 1, but you don't necessarily want to see more. Kappa Cannoneer is usually how you can beat some of the go wide decks, energy, stuff like that. You just get unblockable. But Thought Monitors, Thought Casts are very strong. There's a 2-drop Alchemy that summons Thieving Magpies. That's another consideration in the 2-drop slot. So you can kind of play flexible with that. You have the artifact lines, which provide you some utility in terms of counting both for affinity and then tapping for mana as well. Consigned to memory for both colorless cards as well as triggered abilities. So kind of a stifled bonus, Fragment Realities, cheap removal, activated abilities, cheap counters, Stern Scolding as well, against like Lurrus Piles, Stone of Erich, Sack Effects, Dampening Sphere for multiple spells per turn, Mono Green, stuff like that. And then Metallic Rebuke as counters. We have Grixis Frog, Grixis Control. So this is a Lurrus control deck that's using the Chorus Cycle again. This one's also including Mycelic Ballad. 4 mana, starting intensity 2. Each player sacks 2 creatures and gains X life, where X is the spell's intensity. So another way to kind of go from there. You have Jace Reawaken to draw discard. And then this lets you eventually plot Valky, cast it that way there. Cameos in here, your Psychic Frogs, Snapcasters. So kind of just a Grixis control deck that's looking to stick one of these threats. You have Hive of the Eye Tyrant as a win condition. And then just a whole bunch of cheap removal, disruption counters. Crown of the Lock, Thoughtseizes, cheap removal, Lauren Revealed kind of cycles, early helps you hit line drops, stuff like that. Dig Through Time as an instant effect over Treasure Cruise in this list. Annul for artifacts or enchantments. Stone of Erich again, we've mentioned a lot of these. Legion End, good against like auras, anything kind of in that Lurrus pile, hitting multiple things potentially. Molten Collapse, flexible removal, Test of Talent, as think of it against like Pour Over Pages or key instants or sorceries, and Dispute as a cheap counter. And lastly, this is from Greenwire. They are currently #1 Mythic. With the list, they are on 4-color Samcat. So this deck here is a infinite combo. So you kind of playing the aristocrat game, and then you have a loop. Samwise Gamgee, a cat, and then a sack effect. So either Bartholomew, Cartel Aristocrats, and then Goblin Bombardment are ways to kind of sack and ping. The cat comes in, creates a food, you sack it, then you bring it back with the food, and then it creates food again. It's an infinite loop. You kill them that way. You have the fair game plan of like a Johnny's, Amped Raptors, the kind of bombardment plan, and then Birthing Ritual helps you sack the effects to find more. Artifact Enchantment Hate, Fatal Push and Fragment, and Portable Holes, just flexible removal options. Zone of Erich for the mirrors, Surgical for combo hate, Juggernaut Peddler as a Thoughtseize. So that's it for the week. There wasn't much Lotus that showed up in terms of the win rates. I think the deck is strong, but people just don't necessarily enjoy playing it in mass. Even like this player here, Greenwire, was playing it a lot and kind of shifted. So seems like it's more creature focused. Yogg was doing well last month. They had the Buxton that was nerfed, but these are decks that are kind of more niche that do well for some individual players potentially, but don't necessarily always scale in the larger capacity. A lot of Historic, I find a deck you like, play it, understand it. As long as it's doing something powerful, you could generally win games with. That's it for the week. Let me know what you think. Catch you next time. Thanks for watching.